The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Connor Walsh reached for a box of cornflakes at Millbrook Grocery. 6:30 on a quiet Friday evening. The store was nearly empty, just how he liked it. His 8-year-old daughter Ruby stood beside him, backpack still slung over her small shoulders from the day at school. "Can we get the kind with marshmallows instead?" The bell above the glass door chimed. Then everything shattered. Everyone on the ground now, the masked gunman's voice cracked like a whip through the cramped aisles. Milk cartons crashed. A baby screamed. But Connor's weathered hands remained steady on the cereal box, his steel blue eyes never leaving the threat. Across 3 aisles of chaos, Ruby stood frozen, her school backpack clutched to her chest. "Daddy." Connor slowly raised one finger to his lips. Not a tremor, not a flinch. In that moment of pure chaos, he became an island of impossible calm. And the woman in the tailored black suit watching from the shadows. Her gray eyes weren't filled with fear. They were filled with recognition. The gunman waved his weapon wildly, sweat beading on his forehead beneath the ski mask. Connor noticed the trembling in the man's grip, the way his voice cracked on every syllable. Amateur. Desperate, not dangerous. Connor had seen real killers in Afghanistan. This wasn't one. Fear doesn't make a man run. It makes a man think before he acts. The robber's sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as he approached the register, his movements erratic and unpracticed. Behind the counter, teenage cashier Kevin fumbled with the register keys, his hands shaking violently. I can't get it open." The gunman's frustration mounted, his breathing more ragged. Connor shifted slightly, positioning himself between Ruby and the threat. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled his instincts. He could feel the tension building like a coiled spring, knowing that panic made people do stupid things. The woman in the black suit hadn't moved either, her posture too controlled, too aware. Who was she? The robber spun around, scanning the cowering customers. Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt. Connor watched him through peripheral vision, calculating distances, exits, angles. Ruby's breathing came in short, quiet gasps. She was scared, but holding it together just like he'd taught her during their safety drills at home. Without warning, Connor stepped forward, not rushing, not threatening, just moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd disarmed insurgents in Kandahar. The gunman whirled toward him, weapon raised. I said, "Don't move," but something in Connor's steady gaze made the words die in his throat. Connor's voice came out low, calm, almost conversational. "Son, you don't want to do this. Look at your hands." The robber glanced down instinctively. His grip was loose, finger nowhere near the trigger. "Walk away right now before this gets complicated." The masked man's resolve crumbled like wet paper. He could see something in Connor's eyes that spoke of violence, of capability, of a man who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The weapon lowered slightly. That's when the woman in the black suit moved, blocking the exit with the same quiet efficiency Connor recognized from his military days. The robber saw the trap closing and bolted for the back door, stumbling over displays of potato chips in his desperation to escape. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ruby ran to Connor and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his worn work shirt. "Daddy, how did you know?" Connor's large hands smoothed her dark hair, his voice gentler than silk. "Sometimes you just know, sweetheart. Sometimes you just know." But over Ruby's head, his eyes found the woman in black. She was watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Recognition flickered in her expression, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Police cruisers flooded the parking lot, their red and blue lights painting the storefront in alternating colors. Detective Ray Martinez took statements while paramedics checked everyone for shock. Connor gave his account in clipped professional sentences that revealed nothing about his past, just a concerned father who'd acted on instinct. Ruby clung to his hand, occasionally glancing up at his face for reassurance. She was tougher than most kids her age. Had to be, after losing her mother. The woman in black spoke quietly to Detective Martinez, handing him a business card with practiced ease. Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Impressive work in there." The woman approached Connor as they waited outside. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought. Mid-40s with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her suit cost more than Connor made in 2 months as a plumber. Rebecca Morrison. She extended a manicured hand. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly calloused. Interesting. Connor Walsh. He studied her face, noting the way her gray eyes seemed to catalog every detail about him. You handled that situation like someone with training. Rebecca's smile was perfectly calibrated, professional, but warm. I run a security consulting firm. We're always looking for people with natural instincts. She glanced down at Ruby, who was drawing invisible patterns on the asphalt with her sneaker. Single-parent Connor's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. How could she know that my wife died 3 years ago? Car accident. The words came out flat, rehearsed from repetition. Rebecca's expression softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. That must have been difficult. Ruby tugged on Connor's sleeve. Daddy, can we go home now? I have a math test tomorrow. Connor checked his watch. 7:15 past her usual dinner time. Of course, princess. He turned back to Rebecca, who was pulling out an elegant business card. If you ever consider a career change, Mr. Walsh, Blackstone Security Solutions, we value people who can keep their heads in a crisis. The card was heavy stock embossed lettering. Real money behind this operation. I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy fixing pipes. As they walked to Connor's battered Toyota pickup, Ruby chatted about her day at school. Her resilience amazed him sometimes. 20 minutes ago, she'd been terrified. Now she was worried about her math homework. Connor helped her into the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt with practiced efficiency. In the rearview mirror, he watched Rebecca Morrison climb into a black BMW sedan. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, making a phone call before driving away. Something about her didn't sit right. Too convenient being in that store at exactly the right moment. Stories like this take time to build. Stay with me. What happens next might save your life someday. Connor's two-story house on Maple Street looked exactly like every other house in their neighborhood. White siding, blue shutters, a small front yard that needed mowing. Ruby raced ahead to unlock the front door while Connor grabbed groceries from the truck bed. No cornflakes thanks to the evening's excitement. He'd have to remember to stop by the store tomorrow. Inside the house smelled like the vanilla candles Jennifer used to light every evening. Connor had stopped lighting them after the accident, but the scent lingered in the walls and the furniture in the spaces between memories. Ruby spread her homework across the kitchen table while Connor heated up leftover spaghetti. Daddy, why didn't that man scare you? She looked up from her multiplication table's pencil poised above the paper. Connor considered his answer carefully. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some men carry violence like a scar, that some fear never really goes away? It just gets buried under layers of ordinary life. I was scared, sweetheart. But sometimes being scared means you have to be extra brave. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. After Ruby went to bed, Connor sat on the back porch with a beer in his laptop. Rebecca Morrison's business card lay on the weathered table beside him. Blackstone Security Solutions. Their website was impressive. Corporate clients, government contracts, offices in 3 states. Rebecca's bio photo showed the same confident smile she'd worn at the grocery store. CEO and founder graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown, former consultant, with several prestigious firms. But something felt rehearsed about the whole presentation, like a performance designed to impress rather than inform. The October night air carried the smell of burning leaves and distant barbecue smoke. Suburban perfection. 3 years ago, he thought this life would be enough. Quiet job, good schools for Ruby neighbors who minded their own business. But tonight had awakened something he'd worked hard to bury. That split-second assessment of threat and opportunity. The cold calculation of violence. Jennifer used to worry about that part of him. The part that came back from overseas changed. Now she was gone, and he was alone with whatever darkness lived behind his eyes. Connor dialed a number he rarely used. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Walsh. It's been a minute. Everything okay with the kid, Mike Donovan? Army Rangers. Served 2 tours with Connor before losing his left leg below the knee to an IED. Now ran a security consulting business of his own, much smaller than Blackstone. Ruby's fine. Listen, what do you know about Blackstone Security Solutions? A pause on the line. The sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass. High-end outfit, corporate clients, government connections. Why Connor explained the grocery store incident, Rebecca Morrison's job offer. Mike listened without interrupting a skill developed through years of combat briefings. Rich folks only notice guys like us when they need something dirty done. You stay away from that world, Connor. Nothing there but trouble for men who work with their hands. Connor rolled the beer bottle between his palms, feeling the cool glass against his calluses. Thanks, brother. How's the leg? Mike's laugh was sandpaper rough. Hurts when it rains, which is convenient since I live in Seattle now. After hanging up, Connor stared at Rebecca Morrison's business card for a long moment before setting it aside. Whatever game she was playing, he wanted no part of it. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling. Connor dropped Ruby off at Millbrook Elementary and drove to his first service call of the day. Mrs. Chen's kitchen sink was backing up again, probably tree roots in the main line. He'd been putting off the expensive fix, hoping temporary patches would hold. Connor parked his service van in the driveway and grabbed his toolbox from the back. The familiar weight of wrenches and pipe fittings felt reassuring in his hands. Honest work, predictable problems with logical solutions. Mrs. Chen, 82 and fiercely independent, greeted him at the door in a floral housecoat. She had fired 3 plumbers before finding Connor, declaring the others incompetent, overpriced, or both. You fix right this time, no more bandage solution. Connor smiled. Mrs. Chen had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. Depends if you're ready to pay for the real fix. Her eyes narrowed behind thick glasses. How much? Connor named a figure that made her wince but not argue. Progress. As he laid out his tools in neat rows on a drop cloth beneath the sink, Miss Chen hovered nearby, watching his every move with sharp eyes. She reminded Connor of his drill sergeant sometimes. Your hands know what they're doing, not like other plumbers who guess and break more things. Tools don't lie. They either work or they don't. Same with people. Mrs. Chen nodded sagely as though he'd imparted profound wisdom instead of plumbing philosophy. Connor was halfway through exposing the main line when a sleek black BMW pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, he watched Rebecca Morrison emerge, looking even more out of place in this modest neighborhood than she had at the grocery store. Her black tailored pantsuit was impeccable despite the drizzling rain. Mrs. Chen peered out the window. Who this fancy lady? She sells something. Before Connor could answer, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Connor Walsh speaking. The voice on the other end was smooth professional. Mr. Walsh, this is Rebecca Morrison. We met Friday evening. Connor straightened, suddenly alert. I remember. A pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. I wondered if you might have time for a coffee this afternoon. I'd like to discuss a potential opportunity. Connor wiped grease off his hands with a shop rag. I told you I'm not interested in changing careers. Her laugh was light, almost musical. Humor me. One conversation. There's a coffee shop on Main Street. The Morning Brew. 2 Hardro. Connor found himself agreeing before he'd consciously decided. Something about Rebecca Morrison pulled at him like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. He finished the repair at Mrs. Chen's house, replacing a section of corroded pipe and installing a clean-out access for future maintenance. The old woman inspected his work with critical eyes before grudgingly approving. You good worker. Honest. Not like suits who talk pretty but do nothing. Connor packed his tools with methodical precision, each one returned to its proper place in the heavy-duty toolbox. His father had taught him that organization wasn't just about neatness, it was about respect for your craft. A man who couldn't keep his tools in order couldn't be trusted to do the job right. By the time he reached the Morning Brew, his curiosity had overridden his caution. The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd, but Rebecca had claimed a corner table near the windows. She'd traded the business suit for dark jeans and a cream cashmere sweater. The change made her look younger, less intimidating. Thank you for coming, she gestured to the chair across from her. I ordered you a black coffee. Hope that's all right. Connor slid into the seat, noting she'd chosen a spot with clear sight lines to both entrances. Interesting habit for a security consultant. You mentioned an opportunity. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. Tell me about your military service. The question hit like cold water. Connor's expression went carefully blank. Who says I was in the military? Her smile was knowing, almost predatory. Your posture, the way you assessed that situation Friday night. You've seen combat. Connor's jaw tightened. He didn't like being analyzed, categorized, filed away in someone else's mental database. Afghanistan 2 tours. Army Rangers. The words came out, clipped, uninviting of follow-up questions. Rebecca nodded slowly. Thank you for your service. I know that's not easy to talk about. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words. How would you feel about using those skills again? In a civilian capacity, of course. Connor pushed back from the table. I'm not interested in being a hired gun. Her laugh was sharp, almost bitter. Neither am I, Mr. Walsh. Neither am I. Rebecca pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. The Wellington family. Judge Harrison Wellington, his wife, to Patricia Wellington, 2 children ages 10 and 12. Connor opened the folder reluctantly. Professional photographs, biographical information, home address in the expensive part of Westchester County. They've been receiving threatening letters, detailed surveillance information. Someone knows their routines, their children's school schedules, their favorite restaurants. The police can't act until something actually happens. She pointed to photocopied letters included in the file. Read those and tell me what you think. The letters were printed on standard computer paper. No watermarks or distinctive fonts. But the content made Connor's skin crawl. Intimate details about the family's daily life. Patricia's Tuesday yoga classes, the children's after-school activities, Judge Wellington's route to the courthouse every morning. Whoever wrote these had been watching for months, building a comprehensive profile of vulnerability. Professional surveillance, Connor muttered. This isn't some crackpot with a grudge. Rebecca nodded grimly. Which is why we need someone with your particular skill set. Connor closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. Find someone else. Rebecca's fingers drummed against the table. There's something else you should know about Judge Wellington. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. In 2018, he presided over a high-profile money laundering case. Robert Harrison versus the state of New York. Connor frowned. Harrison, like the judge's first name? Rebecca continued, her words measured and deliberate. Robert Harrison was a small-time accountant who got caught up in something bigger than himself. The prosecution needed a fall guy. Judge Wellington made sure they got one. The implications hung in the air between them like smoke. Connor studied Rebecca's face, looking for tells for signs of deception. You seem to know a lot about this case. Her smile was razor thin. I make it my business to know about corruption in the justice system. She gathered the folder back toward herself. Robert Harrison died in prison last year. Heart attack brought on by stress and despair. He left behind 2 children who aged out of foster care believing their father was a criminal. Connor felt ice forming in his stomach. And you think someone wants revenge against the judge? Rebecca's gray eyes held secrets. I think someone has been planning this for a very long time. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Connor needed airspace to think. I'll consider your offer, he stood abruptly, tossing a $5 bill on the table. Rebecca remained seated, watching him with that unsettling intensity. Mr. Walsh, he paused at her voice. Be careful who you trust. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Outside, the October wind cut through his jacket like a blade. Connor sat in his truck for several minutes trying to process everything Rebecca had told him. The Wellington file lay on the passenger seat like an accusation. That evening, after Ruby finished her homework and went to bed, Connor found himself Googling the Harrison case. The details were even worse than Rebecca had implied. Robert Harrison, 42 years old, married with 2 children, had maintained his innocence throughout the trial. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of known criminals looking for reduced sentences. Harrison's wife, Margaret, had taken her own life 6 months after the conviction. Their son, Blake, 16, had run away from foster care and disappeared. Their daughter, Charlotte, 12, had been placed in state custody. Connor stared at the computer screen until the words blurred together. 2 children orphaned by a corrupt system, a father who died in prison for crimes he didn't commit, and now someone was stalking Judge Wellington's family. The mathematics of revenge was simple and brutal. Connor exhaled slowly, trying to process what he was reading. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the autumn night. This wasn't just about money laundering anymore. This was about powerful men destroying entire families to protect themselves. He closed the laptop and walked out to the back porch. The night air filled his lungs as he gazed up at the stars, trying to reconcile what he was feeling. In Afghanistan, combat had been straightforward. Clear objectives, identified enemies, defined missions. This was murky, complicated by civilian lives and children caught in the crossfire. Just like Ruby could be if he got involved. His instincts were screaming that Rebecca Morrison wasn't telling him everything. Her interest in the Wellington case seemed too personal, too intense. Connor opened his laptop again and began a deeper search, looking beyond the polished Blackstone website. Rebecca Morrison's official biography listed degrees from prestigious universities' awards publications. But when Connor cross-referenced dates and institutions, inconsistencies emerged. No graduation records for Rebecca Morrison at Georgetown in the year she claimed. No mentions in alumni newsletters. The consulting firms she supposedly worked for had no record of her employment during those years. Connor dug deeper, comparing photographs from different years. The woman called Rebecca Morrison seemed to have appeared fully formed about 7 years ago, with no digital footprint before that. A pattern was forming a story beyond the polished facade of Blackstone Security. Connor found himself thinking like a soldier again, assembling intelligence identifying the shape of a threat by the shadows it cast. He picked up his phone and called Mike again. I need more on Blackstone, deeper than their public profile. Mike didn't ask questions. That wasn't their way. Give me till morning. Connor couldn't sleep. The house felt different somehow, as though Rebecca Morrison's very existence had changed the air inside it. He checked on Ruby twice, reassuring himself that she was safe, untouched by whatever game was unfolding around them. The nightmares came as they always did when his combat instincts were activated. Sand and blood and the screams of men he couldn't save. Connor woke at 4 a.m., soaked in sweat, the ghost of his rifle still clutched in his hands. He showered in the dark, letting cold water wash away the memories. By 5 a.m., he was sitting at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee, watching the darkness gradually surrender to dawn. His phone buzzed at 5:30. What I found doesn't make sense. Mike's voice was gritty with fatigue. He'd been up all night, too. Rebecca Morrison doesn't exist before 2018. The company was incorporated that year, but with different leadership. She took over in 2019. Massive influx of private capital from offshore accounts. The kind of shell game that takes serious resources to set up. Connor's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. What about her history, Georgetown? The consulting firm's Mike's laugh was humorless. Fiction. All of it. But here's where it gets interesting. I ran facial recognition against law enforcement databases. Came up empty. Then I tried missing persons. Connor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. And there was a brief facial match with a girl who disappeared from foster care about 15 years ago. Charlotte Harrison, Robert Harrison's daughter. The pieces clicked into place with the finality of a round being chambered. She's not working for the Wellingtons at all. No, if I had to guess, she's the one who's been watching them, building the profile, playing the long game. Connor moved through the morning routine on autopilot, making Ruby's lunch, checking her homework, driving her to school. All the while, his mind was piecing together the implications. Rebecca Morrison, Charlotte Harrison had built an entire identity, an entire company, all for revenge against the man who had destroyed her family. And she had tried to recruit Connor as her unwitting accomplice. After dropping Ruby at school, Connor drove to a coffee shop he'd never visited before, one where Rebecca Morrison wouldn't think to look for him. He ordered black coffee and sat at a corner table, back to the wall, running scenarios. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Connor hesitated before answering. Walsh. Rebecca's voice came through, cool and professional as ever. I was hoping we could continue our discussion. About the Wellington case. Connor kept his voice neutral. I'm busy with clients today. Even to his own ears, the lie sounded hollow. I understand. Perhaps dinner. I know a quiet place where we could talk more freely. Connor could almost see her composed smile, the carefully engineered sincerity. I'll think about it. I'll call you. He hung up before she could respond, then dialed Mike again. I need to confront her. Get the whole story. Mike's sigh was heavy with concern. You're poking a tiger, Walsh. Whatever game she's playing, it's been years in the making. She won't appreciate you changing the rules. Connor knew he was right, but he couldn't walk away, not now. He'd been drawn into something bigger than himself, a collision of past and present, of power and revenge. I need to know what she wants from me. Really wants. Mike was silent for a long moment. Somewhere public, somewhere you control, and for God's sake, wear a vest. Connor arranged to meet Rebecca at a diner in the old industrial district. Mel's a 24-hour joint with faded vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. It was a remnant from the days when the neighborhood had been full of factory workers on shift breaks. Now it served mostly truckers and night shift workers from the remaining warehouses. The diner had 3 exits and clear sight lines through large windows. Connor arrived an hour early, parking his truck where he could observe all approaches. He called Mrs. Chen asking if she could pick Ruby up from after-school care and keep her for a few hours. The old woman agreed without hesitation. She had a soft spot for Ruby, who reminded her of the granddaughter she rarely saw. Mike called at 6:30. I'm in position. Northeast corner, blue sedan. Connor spotted the car, a nondescript Chevy that blended perfectly with the working-class neighborhood. Mike was good at being invisible when he needed to be. Thanks for the backup. Connor's gratitude was genuine. Rangers looked out for their own even years after discharge. Rebecca's BMW arrived at exactly 7 p.m. She parked directly in front of the diner, making no attempt to conceal her presence. Confident, perhaps too confident. Connor watched her enter, noting the way she scanned the interior, assessing threats, exits, opportunities. Not the behavior of a typical CEO, but exactly what he'd expect from someone with training. He waited 5 minutes before following her inside. She had chosen a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. Smart. She wore dark jeans and a simple sweater, again her hair loose around her shoulders. The casual outfit was a calculated choice meant to put him at ease. Rebecca, or should I call you Charlotte? The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Professional, trained to handle surprises. I see you've been doing your homework, Mr. Walsh. Connor slid into the booth across from her, back to the wall, clear view of the entire diner. I don't like being lied to, especially by people who've been watching my daughter. Charlotte's composure cracked slightly at the mention of Ruby. I never meant to involve a child in this. That was an oversight. Connor's laugh was cold. An oversight. Is that what we're calling it? Charlotte's fingers wrapped around her coffee mug, knuckles white with tension. You don't understand what it's like to have everything taken from you, to watch your family destroyed by men who were supposed to uphold justice. The raw pain in her voice was genuine. Connor recognized it. He'd heard it in the voices of men who'd lost brothers in combat, in his own voice after Jennifer's death. So explain it to me. All of it, starting with how Rebecca Morrison came to exist. Charlotte took a deep breath, steadying herself. After my father was convicted, my mother couldn't cope. She took her own life 6 months later. My brother Blake and I went into foster care. Different homes. He ran away, joined the military under a false name. I stayed, finished high school, got scholarships, started building the skills I would need. Connor watched her face, looking for deception, finding only the hard edges of a survivor. My brother died in Syria, IED. By then I had already started putting the pieces together. The money laundering operation my father was accused of running, it was real, but he wasn't the mastermind. He was the fall guy, and Judge Wellington knew it. She pulled out her phone, brought up an image, slid it across the table. A younger Charlotte with a tall young man in military fatigues. The family resemblance was striking. Blake sent me this 2 weeks before he died, the last time I saw him. Connor studied the photo. The young man had the 1,000-yard stare Connor recognized from his own mirror. He'd seen things, done things that had marked him. After Blake died, I had nothing left to lose. I changed my name, used skills I'd learned in college to create a new identity. Then I started building Blackstone. Connor's eyes narrowed. With what money? Charlotte's smile was bitter. Ironic, isn't it? I used the same money laundering networks that destroyed my father. Took me 3 years to trace them, another 2 to siphon enough funds to start the company. Poetic justice. Connor leaned back, processing. The woman across from him had spent 7 years constructing an elaborate revenge fantasy, building an entire company as a front for her true purpose. And the Wellington family. The threats. Charlotte's expression hardened. I've been watching them, learning their routines, their vulnerabilities, just like they did to my family before they destroyed us. Connor felt a chill crawl up his spine. You wrote those letters. It wasn't a question. Charlotte nodded, unapologetic. I needed a way to approach you that wouldn't raise suspicions. A security concern for a high-profile client seemed the obvious choice. The calculation of it all was breathtaking. Years of planning, of building an identity, a company, a reputation, all for the moment when she could strike back at the man who had destroyed her family. What did you want from me? Connor asked the question that had been bothering him since their first meeting. Charlotte's gaze was direct, unflinching. Access. Judge Wellington's security team is good, but they have blind spots. I needed someone who could see the vulnerabilities they couldn't. Someone with combat experience who could move through their defenses without raising alarms. Connor felt his stomach turn. You wanted me to help you kill him. Charlotte's laugh was sharp, brittle. No, death would be too quick, too clean. I want to destroy him the way he destroyed my father. I want to expose him, make him watch as his reputation, his career, his family's respect all crumble around him. I want him to live with the consequences of what he's done. The raw hatred in her voice was like a physical presence between them, cold and dangerous and alive. I never planned to hurt his children. I'm not a monster, but I needed to know their routines to understand when Wellington would be vulnerable. Connor pushed away from the table, disgust rising in his throat. You've been planning this for 7 years, building a life around revenge, and you thought I'd help you. Charlotte's eyes flashed with a desperate intensity. I've seen your service record, Connor, the real one, not the sanitized version they released. You understand that sometimes justice has to be taken, not given. You've done it yourself. Connor's jaw tightened. She'd accessed his classified files somehow, known things about his service that even Jennifer hadn't known. That was war. But before he could finish, his phone rang. The school's number flashed on the screen. Connor's heart stuttered. Mr. Walsh, this is Marjorie from Millbrook Elementary. I'm calling because Ruby wasn't at pickup and we can't seem to reach your emergency contact, Mrs. Chen. Connor's world narrowed to a single point of focus, all else falling away. What do you mean she wasn't at pickup? She should have been in after-school care until 5:30. The woman's voice was apologetic, concerned. According to her teacher, a woman came to pick her up early. She had proper ID and was on your approved list. In Ms. Morrison. The blood drained from Connor's face. He looked up at Charlotte, whose expression had shifted from defiance to confusion. I never picked up your daughter. Connor was already moving, heading for the door, phone pressed to his ear. Call the police. Now. Report her missing. Outside, the October air hit his lungs like a physical blow. Mike was out of his car, moving toward him with the uneven gait of a man with a prosthetic leg, but the combat readiness still evident in every line of his body. What's wrong? Ruby's missing. Someone using Rebecca's name picked her up from school. Charlotte burst through the diner door behind them, her face pale with shock. Connor, I swear I had nothing to do with this. Mike's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon under his jacket. Who the hell is this? Connor's mind was racing, assembling pieces, seeing connections. Rebecca Morrison, also known as Charlotte Harrison. She's been playing me, trying to recruit me for a revenge operation against a judge. Mike's expression hardened, the affable civilian vanishing beneath the cold calculation of a combat veteran. And now your kid is missing. Convenient timing. Charlotte shook her head, genuine fear replacing her earlier composure. This isn't me. I would never involve a child. Before Connor could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message made his blood freeze in his veins. We have the girl. Pier 17, South Street, Seaport. Come alone if you want to see her again. The phone buzzed again, this time with a photo. Ruby, tear-streaked but defiant, holding today's newspaper. Proof of life. Connor's training took over, the emotions locked down tight mind, shifting into operational mode. Save the child, eliminate the threats. Everything else was secondary. Mike, reading over his shoulder, was already moving toward his car. I'll get my kit. Meet you there in 30. Charlotte stepped forward, her face set with determination. This is about me, my past. Let me help. Connor rounded on her fury, breaking through his tactical calm. You've done enough. This is your fault. Your vendetta brought these people into our lives. Charlotte didn't flinch from his anger, which means I know who they are. Frank Murphy and Joey Garcia. They worked with my father. They were part of the money laundering operation. They think I'm going to expose them along with Wellington. Connor processed this new information, fitting it into his mental map of the situation. How many? Charlotte shook her head. I don't know for sure. 3, maybe 4. Connor turned to Mike. I need you to stay back, provide overwatch. These aren't insurgents. They're criminals, amateurs with guns. Mike nodded, understanding the distinction. In some ways, untrained men with firearms were more dangerous than disciplined fighters. They were unpredictable, prone to panic. Charlotte moved toward her BMW. I'm coming with you. Connor blocked her path, his voice flat, dangerous. No, you're staying here. You've done enough damage. Her gray eyes met his, unflinching. They won't hurt Ruby as long as they think you'll bring me to them. That's what they want. Me, not you, not your daughter. Connor recognized this tactical truth in her words, even as he hated admitting it. If they touch a hair on her head, I will end all of them. And then I'll come for you. Charlotte nodded, accepting the threat as her due. A man who's got nothing to lose is the most dangerous animal alive. The drive to South Street Seaport crawled by in tense silence. Connor's knuckles went white around the steering wheel, his mind cycling through tactical scenarios, threat assessments, contingency plans. Charlotte sat rigid in the passenger seat, her earlier confidence replaced by a brittle vigilance. What do these men want from you? Charlotte's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, her voice unnaturally calm. The ledgers. My father kept records of all the transactions he processed, names, dates, amounts. He told me about them the last time I visited him in prison. Said they were insurance. I spent years tracking them down. Connor processed this new information, slotting it into his assessment. And these records implicate Wellington and Murphy and Garcia. Charlotte nodded, and at least a dozen others. Politicians, business leaders, cops, the kind of people who can make problems disappear, like a man wrongfully convicted of money laundering, or a little girl kidnapped from school. The implication hung between them, heavy as a storm cloud. Connor checked his rearview mirror, confirming that Mike's sedan was still following at a discreet distance. Having backup changed the equation gave them options that the kidnappers wouldn't anticipate. They'll expect you to be desperate, emotional. They won't expect it, tactical thinking. Charlotte studied his profile, noting the transformation. The plumber had vanished entirely, replaced by something harder, colder, more dangerous. What will you do when we get there? Connor's eyes never left the road. Whatever it takes to get my daughter back. The simplicity of his answer carried more menace than any elaborate threat. Pier 17 jutted into the East River like an accusing finger, its weathered planks slick with October mist. Warehouses and shipping containers created a maze of shadows and blind corners. Perfect for an ambush. Connor parked 2 blocks away, out of sight of the pier. I want you to wait 5 minutes, then approach from the main entrance. Keep your phone on. Stay visible. Charlotte nodded, understanding her role as the distraction. Connor checked his concealed pistol, ensuring a round was chambered. The familiar weight against his side was both comforting and disturbing. 3 years since he'd carried regularly. 3 years of trying to be just a plumber, just a father. Mike's voice came through his earpiece, calm and professional. I'm in position on the rooftop northeast of the pier. I've got eyes on a warehouse at the end. Light in one window, movement inside. Connor slipped out of the truck, moving through the shadows with the silent efficiency that had kept him alive through 2 combat tours. The memories came flooding back, night operations in Kandahar, moving through hostile territory with nothing but training and instinct to guide him. How many? Mike's voice crackled softly in his ear. 4 that I can see. 1 by the door, 1 patrolling the perimeter, 2 inside with the girl. Ruby, she's alive, sitting in a chair in the center of the room. Appears unharmed. Relief washed through Connor, quickly replaced by cold focus. He circled the perimeter, identifying the guard. Mike had spotted a heavy-set man with a shaved head, smoking a cigarette, a bulge under his jacket indicating a shoulder holster. Amateur, no professional smoked on watch. Connor approached from behind, using a stack of empty pallets for cover. The guard never heard him coming. A swift strike to the base of the skull, precisely calibrated, enough force to render unconscious, not enough to kill. The man crumpled without a sound. Connor dragged him behind the pallets, securing his hands and feet with zip ties from his pocket, gagging him with his own bandana. 1 down. The second guard presented more of a challenge, younger, more alert, actively scanning his surroundings as he patrolled the perimeter of the warehouse. Connor watched his pattern, noting the timing, the blind spots. The young guard passed a stack of shipping containers, momentarily out of sight of the warehouse windows. Connor struck like a snake, one hand clamping over the man's mouth, the other delivering a precise blow to the solar plexus. As the guard doubled over, gasping for breath, Connor applied pressure to the carotid artery, a blood choke, not an air choke. The man lost consciousness in seconds. 2 down. Mike's voice came through the earpiece again. The big guy with the mustache is getting antsy, keeps checking his watch. The one with tattoos is on the phone. Frank Murphy and Joey Garcia. Charlotte's descriptions matched. Connor moved to the side entrance, testing the handle. Locked. He examined the door, old rusted hinges that hadn't been maintained in years. The lock itself was more substantial, a deadbolt that would require a key or specialized tools to defeat. He circled to the loading dock at the rear of the warehouse. A gap beneath one of the roll-up doors provided a view inside. Ruby sat on a metal folding chair in a pool of harsh light from a single overhead bulb. Her hands were tied in front of her, but her eyes were clear alert, scanning her surroundings. Connor felt a surge of pride. She was scared, but thinking just as he'd taught her. Frank Murphy paced in front of her, agitation evident in every movement. Balding mustached, with the soft physique of a man who'd once been powerful but had gone to seed. Joey Garcia leaned against a support column, scrolling through his phone. Younger, muscular, with tattoos covering his left arm. Both men carried pistols in shoulder holsters, visible now that they'd removed their jackets in the warm warehouse. Where is he? He should be here by now. Murphy's voice carried through the gap, tense with frustration. Garcia checked his phone for the dozenth time. Maybe he called the cops. The third man, younger and nervous, fingered the grip of a pistol tucked into his waistband. If he did, we're all going down. Murphy's voice cut through their bickering like a blade. Nobody's going down. We deliver our message to Walsh. He passes it along to Charlotte, and everybody walks away clean. But Connor could see the lie in Murphy's eyes, could read the tension in his posture. These men were scared, desperate, backed into a corner where violence became inevitable. They had no intention of letting Ruby go. This was an execution disguised as a negotiation. Charlotte's voice came through the earpiece, tense but controlled. I'm approaching the main entrance now. Connor repositioned to watch her arrival. She walked openly down the pier. Her posture straight, head high, looking every inch the confident CEO despite the circumstances. A calculated performance. Murphy emerged from the warehouse, Garcia close behind him, leaving the nervous young man to watch Ruby. Connor used their distraction to slip inside through the side entrance. The lock had yielded to his pocket knife and years of experience manipulating mechanisms. Charlotte Murphy's voice carried across the pier, surprise and suspicion mingling. Where's Walsh? Charlotte's response was cool, collected. He's nearby, watching. He wanted proof Ruby wasn't harmed before he showed himself. Murphy's laugh was ugly. Smart man, trust but verify. As they talked, Connor moved through the shadows of the warehouse, circling behind the young guard who stood watching Ruby. The man was jumpy, inexperienced, his attention divided between the girl and the conversation outside. Connor closed the distance silently, years of combat training, guiding each step. Ruby saw him first. Her eyes widened slightly, but she gave no other sign of recognition. Smart girl. Connor pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed to the floor. Ruby understood immediately, sliding off the chair and dropping to the ground as Connor lunged forward. The guard never knew what hit him. One moment he was standing, watch the next, he was unconscious on the concrete floor, Connor's arm locked around his throat in a perfect rear naked choke. Connor eased him down, then moved quickly to Ruby, cutting her bonds with his pocket knife. Stay down. Stay quiet. His voice was barely a whisper. Ruby nodded, her eyes wide but tearless. Connor slipped his backup pistol into her hands, not to use but to hide. A last resort if everything went wrong. Ruby tucked it into her jacket pocket, without question, understanding instinctively that this was not a toy, but a terrible responsibility. Connor moved to the warehouse door, positioning himself to intercept Murphy and Garcia when they returned. Outside, Charlotte was still talking, playing for time. I have what you want, the ledgers, but I need assurances. Murphy's patience was clearly wearing thin. You're not in a position to negotiate, Charlotte. Or should I call you Rebecca now? That's quite an operation you've built. Your daddy would be proud. Before Walsh shot him in prison, that is. Connor froze, the words hitting him like physical blows. Before Walsh shot him in prison. The implication was clear, deliberate. These men knew exactly who he was, knew his military background, his specialized training. This wasn't a random kidnapping. It was a calculated trap. Charlotte's composure cracked for the first time. What are you talking about? Murphy's smile was vicious. You didn't know your father didn't die of his heart attack. He was shot during a prison riot by a corrections officer named James Walsh, Connor's older brother. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Connor felt the world tilt beneath him, past and present, colliding with sickening force. James. his estranged brother who'd taken a job in corrections after washing out of the military. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the funeral. Murphy was still talking, twisting the knife with evident pleasure. Isn't that a delicious irony? You spent years building this elaborate revenge scheme, and all along you've been working with the brother of the man who killed your father. Connor could see Charlotte's face, the shock and betrayal warring with disbelief. She hadn't known. This was new information to her as well. You're lying. Her voice was steady, but Connor could hear the tremor beneath it. Murphy shrugged. Check the death certificate if you don't believe me. Or better yet, ask Walsh yourself. He's here, isn't he? Watching us right now. Murphy turned slowly, scanning the shadows, his hand moving toward his shoulder holster. Come out. Come out. Wherever you are, we've got so much to talk about, you and I. Connor's mind raced, reassessing the situation in light of this new information. If Murphy was telling the truth, and his instincts said he was, then this wasn't just about Charlotte's ledgers. This was personal. These men had deliberately drawn him into Charlotte's revenge plot, knowing exactly who he was, who his brother was. Mike's voice came through the earpiece, steady and calm. You've got company. Black SUV approaching from the east. 4 men, tactical gear. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Connor needed to extract Ruby now before additional players entered the field. He used the shadows to circle back to where she waited, crouched behind a stack of crates. Time to go, princess. He scooped her up in one fluid motion, heading for the loading dock at the rear of the warehouse. Ruby clung to his neck, her small body trembling against his chest. Connor moved with the silent efficiency that had kept him alive through dozens of combat operations, each step precisely placed to avoid creaking floorboards or rattling debris. Outside, Murphy was still talking, his voice raised to carry across the pier. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out, Charlotte? The fake identity, the security company, the obsession with Wellington. We've been watching you for years, just waiting for you to make your move. Connor reached the rear loading dock, easing the door open just enough to slip through with Ruby. The October night air hit them like a physical blow after the stuffy warehouse. He set Ruby down behind a stack of shipping pallets, crouching to look her in the eye. I need you to be very brave right now. Uncle Mike is going to come for you. When he does, you go with him. No questions. No waiting for me. Understand? Ruby nodded, her dark eyes serious in her pale face. Are you going back for the lady? Connor hesitated, torn between his duty to Charlotte, who, whatever her faults, was now in mortal danger because of him, and his responsibility to get Ruby to safety. Yes, but you're more important, always. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then contacted Mike through the earpiece. I've got Ruby, south loading dock. We need extraction now. On my way. 30 seconds. Connor watched as Murphy and Garcia herded Charlotte into the warehouse, their guns now openly displayed. Her face was a mask of shock and confusion, the cool CEO persona shattered by Murphy's revelations. The black SUV Mike had spotted pulled up at the end of the pier, disgorging 4 men in tactical gear. Not police, their movements were too uncoordinated, their equipment mismatched. Mercenaries or perhaps private security. Either way, they complicated an already volatile situation. Mike appeared at the edge of the loading dock, moving with surprising agility despite his prosthetic leg. He spotted Ruby and gave Connor a sharp nod. I've got her. Go. Connor squeezed Ruby's shoulder one last time. Be good for Uncle Mike. I'll see you soon. Then he was moving back toward the warehouse, driven by a combination of duty and the growing fury that Murphy's revelations had ignited. James, his brother, somehow connected to this mess in ways Connor was only beginning to understand. Inside the warehouse, Murphy had forced Charlotte into the chair previously occupied by Ruby. Garcia stood guard while the nervous young man Connor had incapacitated earlier was nowhere to be seen. Where's the girl? Murphy's voice was dangerous, his earlier confidence giving way to barely controlled rage. Charlotte's eyes darted around the warehouse looking for Ruby, for Connor, for any sign of hope. I don't know. I thought she was here with you. Murphy backhanded her across the face, the blow snapping her head to the side. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Don't play games with me. Where is Walsh? Charlotte straightened in the chair, a hint of her former composure returning. If Ruby's gone, then he's gone too. You've lost your leverage. Murphy raised his hand to strike her again, but Garcia caught his wrist. We've got company. The men from the SUV were approaching the warehouse, weapons drawn, moving with the confidence of professionals. Murphy cursed, then turned back to Charlotte. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Connor watched from the shadows as Murphy and Garcia retreated to the rear office of the warehouse, dragging Charlotte with them. The new arrivals entered cautiously, sweeping the main floor with tactical precision. Their gear was high-end, their movements disciplined, not amateurs like Murphy and his crew. The leader, a tall man with a close-cropped gray beard, spoke into a lapel mic. Warehouse secured, no sign of primary targets. Proceeding to secondary sweep. Connor's combat instincts screamed danger. These men weren't police. They weren't FBI. Their tactical gear bore no identifying markings. Their communications equipment was non-standard. Private contractors, then. But working for whom? Mike's voice came through Connor's earpiece, tense with urgency. Ruby's secure, but we've got another problem. Second SUV just arrived. 2 men's suits. One of them looks like Judge Wellington. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Wellington had hired private security to clean up his mess, to eliminate Charlotte and her evidence before she could expose him. Connor had to move fast. He circled through the shadows to the rear office, where Murphy and Garcia had taken Charlotte. Through a grimy window, he could see them arguing, Garcia gesturing frantically while Murphy held a gun to Charlotte's head. They were trapped, cornered animals looking for a way out. The tactical team was methodically searching the warehouse, moving closer to the office with each passing minute. Connor needed a distraction. He retreated to a stack of wooden crates, examining their contents. Industrial chemicals. Flammable. Perfect. Connor created a rudimentary incendiary device, not enough to cause serious damage, but sufficient to create smoke and confusion. He positioned it on the far side of the warehouse, set a 5-minute timer, then moved back toward the office. The explosion was small but effective. Smoke billowed through the warehouse, setting off fire alarms and sprinklers. The tactical team immediately redirected their attention to the source of the blast, shouting orders and moving away from the office. Connor seized the opportunity, breaking the office window with his elbow and vaulting inside. Murphy and Garcia whirled toward him, weapons raised. Charlotte sat bound to a chair, blood trickling from her split lip, eyes wide with surprise and hope. Connor didn't hesitate. He drove his shoulder into Garcia, sending both of them crashing into a filing cabinet. Murphy fired the shot, going wide as Charlotte threw herself sideways, chair and all, into his legs. Connor disarmed Garcia with a practiced twist, then delivered a precise strike to his temple. The tattooed man crumpled to the floor unconscious. Murphy recovered quickly, aiming his pistol at Charlotte's head. One more step, and she dies. Connor froze, assessing angles, distances, probabilities of success. You're not walking out of here, Murphy. Wellington's cleanup crew is outside. They're not here to rescue you. Doubt flickered across Murphy's face. You're lying. Charlotte's laugh was bitter despite her precarious position. He's telling the truth. Wellington doesn't leave loose ends. And that's all we are to him now. Loose ends. Outside, the tactical team was regrouping, moving back toward the office with renewed purpose. Connor could hear their boots on the concrete floor, the crackle of their radio communications. We're out of time. Your choice, Murphy. Die here or come with us. Murphy's eyes darted between Connor and the door, calculation warring with fear. How do I know you won't kill me the second we're clear? Connor met his gaze steadily. You don't. But Wellington's men definitely will. It was enough. Murphy nodded sharply, lowering his weapon. Get me out of here. Connor cut Charlotte's bonds with his pocket knife, then handed her Garcia's pistol. Stay behind me. Shoot anyone who isn't us. They moved back through the broken window, just as the office door burst open, tactical team members pouring in with weapons raised. Murphy fired blindly over his shoulder, more to create confusion than to hit targets. Connor led them through the smoke-filled warehouse, using the chaos to mask their movements. Outside, the October night was alive with sirens in the distance. Someone had reported the explosion, the gunfire. Police would be arriving soon. Connor guided Charlotte and Murphy toward the waterfront, away from the pier entrance, where Wellington and his men waited. There was a small dock on the east side of the pier, used primarily by maintenance crews. A single motorboat was moored there, its owner nowhere in sight. Connor helped Charlotte aboard, then turned to Murphy, who hesitated at the edge of the dock. Now what Connor's expression was unreadable in the dim light. Now you tell me everything. Starting with my brother. Murphy's laugh was hollow. Your brother was a means to an end. We needed someone with military training who could access the prison, someone who could be manipulated. James Walsh had gambling debts, a failing marriage, and a chip on his shoulder about his more successful younger brother. He was perfect. Rage built in Connor's chest, cold and precise. You used him to kill Harrison. Murphy shrugged. We convinced him Harrison was a threat to national security, that taking him out was a patriotic duty. He believed us, right up until he put a bullet in his own head 3 months later. The revelation hit Connor like a physical blow. James had committed suicide. Connor had assumed it was the gambling, the divorce. He'd never imagined his brother had been manipulated into becoming an assassin, then discarded when he was no longer useful. Charlotte's face was pale in the moonlight, shock and grief battling for dominance. My father was executed. And your brother? The implication hung between them, terrible in its simplicity. They had both lost family to the same conspiracy, unwitting pawns in a game played by men like Wellington and Murphy. The sound of boots on wood brought Connor back to the present. The tactical team had found their trail, was moving toward the dock with purpose. Connor shoved Murphy into the boat, then jumped in himself, starting the engine with practiced ease. The small craft roared to life, carrying them away from the pier just as the first bullets hit the water around them. Charlotte crouched low into the boat, her earlier composure shattered by the night's revelations. Where are we going? Connor steered the boat toward the Brooklyn side of the river, putting distance between them and their pursuers. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can regroup. Murphy huddled in the bow, his earlier bravado replaced by grim resignation. There is no safe. Not from Wellington. Not from the people he works for. Connor's gaze was fixed on the distant shore, his mind racing through options, contingencies, escape routes. Tell me about the ledgers. Charlotte wiped blood from her lip, her eyes hard in the moonlight. They're in a safe deposit box, Manhattan Trust Bank. I was planning to use them to destroy Wellington legally, to expose him the money laundering operation, all of it. Murphy laughed, the sound brittle in the cold night air. And you think that would work? Wellington has judges, cops, politicians in his pocket. The kind of people who can make evidence disappear, witnesses recant, prosecutors back off. Connor guided the boat into a small inlet on the Brooklyn side, cutting the engine as they drifted toward an abandoned pier. Then we don't use the legal system, we use the court of public opinion. Charlotte glanced at him sharply. What do you mean? Connor secured the boat to a rusted cleat, then helped Charlotte onto the dilapidated pier. I mean, we release everything, all at once. Every name, every transaction, every connection. Not to the police, to the press, to the internet. Make it too big to bury. Murphy's face went pale. You do that, and you'll have targets on your backs for the rest of your lives. These people don't forgive. They don't forget. Connor's smile was cold. Neither do I. They made their way through the industrial waterfront, Connor leading them through abandoned warehouses and construction sites, with the unerring sense of direction that had guided him through war zones. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Mike, we're at the safe house, Ruby Secure. Where are you, Brooklyn waterfront? Headed your way with 2 packages. Mike's response was immediate. 2. Who's the second? Connor glanced at Murphy, who trudged alongside them, a broken man haunted by his own choices. Insurance and information. The safe house was a converted factory loft in Red Hook, owned by a former ranger who asked no questions and expected no answers. Connor had used it once before during the chaotic days after Jennifer's death, when reporters had camped outside his home, hungry for details about the tragic accident that had claimed the life of a rising political staffer. Mike met them at the service entrance, his prosthetic leg not slowing him as he conducted a thorough security sweep of the surrounding area before letting them inside. His expression darkened when he saw Murphy. Who's this? Connor's voice was flat. The man who got my brother killed. Mike's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon, but Connor shook his head. Not yet. We need what he knows. The loft was sparsely furnished but functional. Ruby sat at a battered kitchen table, a mug of hot chocolate cradled in her small hands. She looked up as they entered, her face lighting up at the sight of her father. Daddy Connor crossed to her in 3 long strides, gathering her into his arms, burying his face in her dark hair. For a moment, the soldier vanished, replaced by a father whose entire world had been threatened. Hey, princess, you okay? Ruby nodded against his chest. Uncle Mike gave me hot chocolate and said you were being a hero. Connor's laugh was rough with emotion. Uncle Mike talks too much. Over Ruby's head, Connor's eyes met Charlotte's. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, blood dried on her split lip, her perfect composure in tatters. The sophisticated CEO was gone, replaced by a woman whose carefully constructed revenge had crumbled around her. Ruby followed his gaze, studying Charlotte with solemn curiosity. Is she a good guy or a bad guy? The question hung in the air, deceptively simple. Connor considered his answer carefully. She's someone who got hurt very badly and tried to make it right in the wrong way. Ruby nodded, accepting this with the uncomplicated wisdom of childhood. Like when I hit Tommy Parker after he broke my clay sculpture and you said two wrongs don't make a right, Connor smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Something like that. Mike secured Murphy to a chair in the corner, then checked the perimeter again, moving with the practiced vigilance of a man who'd survived combat by never taking safety for granted. When he returned, his expression was grim. We've got maybe 12 hours before they track us here. Less if Wellington has the pull. I think he does. Connor nodded, mind already mapping out their next moves. We need the ledgers, tonight. Charlotte sank onto the battered couch, the events of the day catching up with her. The bank doesn't open until 9 a.m. Connor shook his head. We can't wait that long. We need those ledgers now before Wellington can move against us. Charlotte's laugh was bitter. What do you suggest, breaking into Manhattan Trust Bank in the middle of the night? Mike and Connor exchanged a look, years of shared combat experience communicating volumes in a single glance. Not the bank, the night deposit box. Charlotte stared at them, realization dawning. You can't be serious. Connor was already moving, checking his weapon-gathering supplies from the safe house's emergency cache. Deadly. Mike will stay with Ruby and our guest. You're coming with me. Charlotte pushed herself off the couch, wincing as the movement aggravated injuries from her earlier rough handling. And if I refuse, Connor's gaze was level, unflinching. Then you're on your own, and Wellington will find you long before you find safety. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact delivered with the calm certainty of a man who understood precisely how dangerous their situation had become. Charlotte studied him for a long moment, seeing beyond the plumber to the soldier beneath. Whatever she found there must have reassured her because she nodded once sharply. What's the plan? For the next hour, they worked with focused intensity. Connor and Mike falling into the familiar rhythms of mission planning, while Charlotte provided details about the bank's security systems, deposit procedures, and the layout of the branch where her safe deposit box was located. Murphy watched from his secured position, his earlier bravado replaced by a grim resignation. Occasionally, he offered information about Wellington's resources, connections, likely responses to their actions. Connor listened without comment, filing away details that might prove useful. Ruby fell asleep on the couch, exhausted by the day's trauma. Connor covered her with his jacket, brushing dark hair from her forehead with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the tactical precision of his planning. Charlotte watched this tender moment, something complex flickering across her face. She's a remarkable child. Connor nodded, his voice soft to avoid waking Ruby. She's everything good about her mother and nothing bad about me. Charlotte's expression softened. I think you're wrong about that. She has your strength, your ability to stay calm in a crisis. Connor studied Charlotte, seeing beyond the sophisticated facade to the wounded child beneath, the girl who had lost everything and spent 7 years building an elaborate revenge to fill the void. Why Wellington? Why not go after the people who actually killed your father? Charlotte's smile was bitter. Wellington was the gatekeeper, the one who made it all possible. Without him, the money laundering operation would have been exposed years ago. He protected them, provided legal cover, made sure the right people were convicted and the wrong people walked free. A familiar pattern. Connor had seen it in Afghanistan, corrupt officials enabling criminal enterprises sacrificing innocents to protect the guilty. Different context, same disease. In the company Blackstone, Charlotte's laugh was hollow. A means to an end. I needed resources, connections, a way to move in the circles where Wellington operated. It took years to build a reputation, the client list, the facade of respectability. Connor recognized the calculation behind her actions, the strategic patience. In another context, it might have been admirable. You never intended to help the Wellingtons with their security. It wasn't a question, but Charlotte answered anyway. No, I created the threat to give myself a reason to approach them, to get close enough to gather the final pieces I needed. Mike returned from his perimeter check, his expression grim. NYPD has an APB out for both of you. Charlotte's picture is all over the news. CEO kidnapped during client meeting. Wellington spinning quite a tale. Connor wasn't surprised. Wellington was covering his tracks, creating a narrative that would justify any action taken against them. Time to move. Charlotte rose from the couch, her earlier exhaustion masked by renewed determination. If we're really doing this, I have conditions. Connor raised an eyebrow, waiting. No one gets hurt, not even Wellington. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice, real justice. The distinction mattered to her. Connor could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. Whatever Charlotte Harrison had been planning for the past 7 years tonight had changed her calculus. Agreed. But if it comes down to protecting Ruby or keeping that promise, Ruby comes first. Always, Charlotte nodded understanding, as it should be. Connor turned to Mike, clasping his shoulder in a gesture that conveyed more than words could express. Keep them safe. If I'm not back by dawn, Mike cut him off with a sharp nod. I'll get them out. Canada first, then off-grid. I've still got contacts who don't ask questions. Connor knelt beside Ruby, pressing a kiss to her forehead, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, committing it to memory. Just in case. Let's go. The night was cold and clear. The October sky scattered with stars that seemed indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath them. Connor drove a nondescript sedan Mike had acquired through channels better left unexamined, navigating the late-night streets of Brooklyn with confident precision. Charlotte sat beside him, her earlier poise returning with each mile that separated them from the warehouse confrontation. She'd washed the blood from her face, smoothed her hair, straightened her clothing. Armor being reassembled piece by piece. You never told me about your brother. Connor's hands tightened on the steering wheel, the only outward sign that her words had struck a nerve. There was nothing to tell. We weren't close. Charlotte's gaze was steady, searching. But you didn't know he was involved in my father's death. It wasn't a question. Connor answered anyway. No, I thought he killed himself because of gambling debts, because his marriage fell apart. I never imagined. The words trailed off unnecessary. Charlotte nodded in understanding the weight of what remained unsaid. My father was innocent. Of the money laundering, at least. Connor glanced at her, noting the qualification. But not innocent of everything. Charlotte's smile was sad. Few of us are. He knew what the company was doing, knew the money wasn't clean. But he was a bookkeeper, not a mastermind. He processed transactions, maintained records. He didn't ask questions. Until it was too late. Until Wellington needed a fall guy and my father was convenient. They lapsed into silence as Connor navigated through the near-empty streets of Lower Manhattan. The financial district was deserted at this hour. The towering buildings dark except for security lighting the sidewalks, empty of the suits and briefcases that would flood them in the morning. Manhattan Trust Bank occupied the first floor of a modern glass and steel structure on Wall Street. During business hours, it would be bustling with activity tellers, loan officers, wealth managers catering to the financial district's elite clientele. Now it was dark, the only sign of life, a security guard visible through the front windows, making his hourly rounds. Connor parked 2 blocks away, out of sight of the bank's security cameras. Show me the night deposit setup. Charlotte led him around the corner to a small alcove containing the night deposit box, a reinforced metal drawer built into the wall, designed to allow business customers to make deposits after hours. A security camera was mounted above it, its red light indicating active monitoring. Connor studied the setup, assessing weaknesses, entry points, potential complications. The night deposit box itself was secure, designed to allow deposits but prevent theft. But that wasn't their target. Once we're inside, how long to access your safe deposit box? Charlotte considered the question. 5 minutes, maybe less. I have the key. The challenge will be getting into the vault area without triggering alarms. Connor nodded, mind calculating angles, timelines, contingencies. There's a service entrance on the east side. Delivery companies use it for restocking ATMs and delivering supplies. It'll have security, but different from the main doors. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? Connor's smile was grim. I did 2 tours in Afghanistan identifying vulnerabilities in supposedly secure compounds. Banks follow patterns, predictable ones. They circled the block, Connor noting security camera positions, entry points, potential escape routes. The service entrance was as he'd predicted, a reinforced door with a keycard reader and a separate camera system. Can you get us through that door? Charlotte studied the security setup, her expression thoughtful. Maybe. Blackstone installed similar systems for several financial clients. The override codes tend to follow patterns. Connor handed her his phone. Then let's find out what pattern this one follows. Charlotte worked quickly, her fingers flying over the screen as she accessed databases, cross-referenced, client installations, narrowed down possibilities. The CEO persona had returned fully, now confident and focused. I've got 3 potential override sequences. One of them should work. Connor checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. The security guard would make his next round at 3 years, giving them a narrow window of opportunity. Let's move. They approached the service entrance, staying close to the building to minimize their profile on security cameras. Charlotte entered the first override code. The key card reader blinked red. Denied. She tried the second code. Another red light. Come on, come on. The third code produced a different response. The key card reader blinked green once, then yellow, requiring additional authentication. It wants a key card with the right RFID signature. Connor reached into his pocket, producing a small electronic device, a universal RFID emulator Mike had provided from his collection of specialized equipment. Try this. Charlotte held the device against the reader. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the light turned green, and the door lock disengaged with an audible click. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a service corridor that ran behind the main banking floor. Motion sensors were visible at intervals along the ceiling, their status lights glowing red in the dimness. Charlotte pointed to a control panel near the door. Service corridor sensors. They're on a separate system from the main floor. If I can access the control panel. But Connor was already moving, reaching up to a ventilation grate in the ceiling, removing it with practiced ease to reveal a narrow crawl space above. We go over, not through. Charlotte looked dubious. In these clothes, Connor's expression was unsympathetic. Your choice? Dirty clothes or prison jumpsuit? That settled it. Charlotte allowed Connor to boost her into the crawl space, then followed himself, replacing the ventilation grate behind them. The space was cramped, dusty, and uncomfortably warm from the building's heating system. They crawled in silence, Connor leading the way based on his mental map of the bank's layout. After what felt like an eternity of cramped movement, they reached a grate that overlooked the main vault area. Connor peered through the slats, confirming it was empty of personnel. Wait here. He removed the grate carefully, then lowered himself into the room below with near-silent precision. After a quick scan for security measures, he gestured for Charlotte to follow. She descended less gracefully, but with admirable determination, brushing dust from her clothes as she oriented herself. The vault itself was a massive steel door, closed and locked for the night. But the safe deposit box area was in an adjacent room protected by a secondary security system. Charlotte approached the keypad beside the door, entering a code from memory. My client access code. It won't get us through the main vault, but the safe deposit area uses a different system. The door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, rows of metal boxes lined the walls, each secured with the dual key system, requiring both the client's key and the bank's master. Charlotte moved directly to box 714, inserting her key. Then she hesitated, looking back at Connor. We need the bank's key too. Connor examined the lock, then produced a set of specialized picks from an inner pocket of his jacket. Not necessarily. His hands moved with practiced precision, manipulating the lock mechanism with delicate pressure. Years of combat had given him skills that transferred surprisingly well to civilian applications. The ability to defeat security systems, to move undetected, to improvise solutions under pressure. The lock yielded after 30 seconds of focused effort. Connor pulled the box from its nesting place, setting it on the central table. Charlotte opened it with reverent care, revealing a stack of ledgers bound in faded leather, the pages yellow with age. My father's records. Every transaction, every name, every account number. Connor glanced at his watch. 2:43 a.m. The security guard would begin his rounds in 17 minutes. We need to move. Charlotte hesitated, her hand hovering over the ledgers. There's something else. From beneath the ledgers, she withdrew a small flash drive. Digital copies. Everything scanned, indexed, searchable. I spent years preparing this. Connor nodded, impressed despite himself by her thoroughness, her commitment to her cause. Let's go. They reversed their path, crawling back through the ventilation system, dropping into the service corridor, slipping out the service entrance just as a security guard appeared at the far end of the main banking floor, beginning his 3 a.m. rounds. In the car, Charlotte clutched the ledgers and flash drive to her chest like precious cargo, which in a very real sense they were. 7 years of her life dedicated to obtaining these records to building a case against the men who had destroyed her family. Now what Connor navigated through the empty streets heading back toward Brooklyn in the safe house. Now we use what you found. Not for revenge, for justice. Charlotte studied his profile in the dim light of passing street lamps, seeing the soldier beneath the plumber, the father beneath the fighter. A man provides, a man protects. Everything else is just decoration. The words hung between them, a simple philosophy that somehow encompassed everything Connor Walsh believed about the world, about his role in it, about the responsibilities that defined him. Back at the safe house, Mike met them at the door, his expression grim. "We've got a problem." Mike's words hung in the air as Connor and Charlotte entered the safe house. Ruby was still asleep on the couch, but Murphy was gone. In his place sat Detective Ray Martinez, his service weapon holstered but visible at his hip. Connor froze instincts, calculating distances, angles, escape routes. Martinez raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "Easy, Walsh. I'm not here officially." Mike stood nearby, tense but not alarmed. "Martinez showed up 20 minutes ago, alone. He let me check him for wires." Connor's eyes narrowed, assessing the detective with newfound wariness. "Where's Murphy?" Martinez gestured toward the bathroom. "Secured. Your friend here insisted. Smart precaution." Charlotte clutched the ledgers tighter against her chest, her face a careful mask. "Why are you here?" Detective Martinez leaned forward, his expression grave. "Because in about 4 hours, a joint task force is going to descend on this location with shoot-to-kill orders for both of you." Connor didn't react outwardly, but his mind raced, recalibrating. "How did you find us?" Martinez's smile was grim. "I've been tracking Wellington for 3 years. When Charlotte Harrison appeared on the radar, I started watching her too. When both of you disappeared from that warehouse, I figured you'd head somewhere familiar. This place has been on my list of potential Walsh bolt holes for a while." Charlotte glanced at Connor, questions in her eyes. Connor kept his focus on Martinez. "You said Wellington, not Judge Wellington. Interesting choice of words." Martinez nodded, acknowledging the observation. "I've been building a case against him since 2015. Slowly, carefully, the kind of case that can't be buried or dismissed. And now you two have blown it all to hell with your warehouse escapade." He gestured toward the ledgers Charlotte held. "Though I'm guessing those might make it worth the complication." Charlotte set the ledgers on the table, her posture straightening as she reclaimed some of her executive authority. "My father's records. Every transaction the money laundering operation processed from 2012 to 2018. Names, dates, amounts, account numbers." Martinez's eyes widened slightly, the only indication of his surprise. "That's quite a find, Ms. Harrison. Or should I call you Miss Morrison?" Charlotte's smile was thin. "Harrison will do. I'm tired of pretending to be someone else." Connor moved to check on Ruby, confirming she was still asleep before rejoining the conversation. "You said 4 hours. Why the warning?" Martinez studied him with the careful assessment of a man accustomed to reading people. "Because I've spent 3 years building this case. Because your brother deserved better than what happened to him. And because I know what it's like to watch your family destroyed by men who think they're above the law." The personal admission hung in the air, unexpected and weighty. Connor recognized the look in Martinez's eyes, the same burning need for justice that had driven Charlotte for 7 years. Different methods, same fuel. "What do you propose?" Martinez reached for the flash drive Charlotte had placed beside the ledgers. "May I?" Charlotte nodded. Martinez pocketed the drive, then outlined his plan. "I have a secure server untraceable back to me. We upload everything tonight. Then we arrange for simultaneous distribution to every major news outlet, federal agency, and international watchdog organization tomorrow at noon." Mike, who had been silently monitoring the exchange, spoke up. In Wellington's task force, Martinez's expression hardened. "By noon, they'll have bigger problems than finding you." Connor considered the proposal, weighing options, risks, potential outcomes. "What about Ruby?" Martinez's gaze softened slightly. "My sister has a cabin upstate, off the grid, no paper trail connecting it to me or my family. She can stay there until this blows over." Charlotte watched the exchange with calculating eyes, her CEO persona fully restored, despite the dust and grime from their bank excursion. "And what do you get out of this?" Detective Martinez's laugh was without humor. The satisfaction of watching Harrison Wellington lose everything he's spent 30 years building. That's payment enough. Connor made his decision, the familiar clarity of combat focus settling over him. We'll need transportation, secure communications, and Murphy comes with us. Martinez raised an eyebrow. The guy in the bathroom, why Connor's expression was grim, because he knows who gave the order for my brother to kill Charlotte's father. And I want names. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Martinez uploaded the contents of the flash drive to his secure server, then made arrangements for the cabin upstate. Mike prepared Ruby for travel, packing her small go bag with essentials and explaining in child-appropriate terms that she was going on a special adventure with Uncle Mike. Connor took Charlotte aside, speaking in low tones to avoid being overheard. You don't have to come with us. Martinez can arrange protection for you too. Charlotte's smile was sad but determined. 7 years, Connor. 7 years of building toward this moment. I need to see it through. There was something new in her expression, a clarity that had been missing before, as though the night's revelations had burned away some internal fog. My father wouldn't have wanted this. Not the way I was planning it. He believed in justice, not revenge. Connor recognized the shift, the reframing of purpose that often came after combat, after facing death, and making choices that couldn't be unmade. It's not too late to choose differently. Charlotte's eyes met his, steady and clear. I already have. As dawn approached, they finalized their plans. Mike would take Ruby to the cabin upstate, staying with her until the situation resolved. Martinez would return to his precinct, positioning himself to manage the fallout when the evidence went public. Connor, Charlotte, and a secured Murphy would relocate to a motel in New Jersey, where they would await confirmation that the evidence had been distributed as planned. Connor knelt beside the couch where Ruby was now awake, her dark eyes solemn in her small face. I need you to go with Uncle Mike for a little while. Just a few days. Ruby studied him with the unnerving perception of childhood. Is it because of the bad men? Connor nodded, never lying to his daughter about important things. Yes, but they won't find you and they won't hurt you. Uncle Mike will keep you safe until I come get you. Ruby's small fingers traced the lines of his face as though memorizing the contours. Are you going to hurt the bad men? The question pierced Connor's carefully maintained composure. This was the central fear that had haunted him since returning from Afghanistan, that the violence he had carried within him would someday spill over, tainting Ruby's life as it had his own. No, princess, I'm going to make sure they face consequences for what they've done. The right way. Ruby nodded, accepting his answer with the simple faith of a child who had never known her father to break a promise. Like when Tommy Parker had to apologize to the whole class for breaking my sculpture? Connor smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Something like that, but bigger. He gathered her into his arms, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, committing it to memory. Just in case. I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, right? Ruby nodded against his chest. I know, Daddy. I love you too, even when you won't let me have the cereal with marshmallows. Connor's laugh was rough with emotion. Even now, facing danger and uncertainty, she could make him smile. Jennifer's gift to them both. Ruby's resilient spirit, her innate understanding that love persisted even through hardship. Charlotte watched this exchange from across the room, something complicated flickering across her face. Connor recognized that the pain of witnessing the family bonds she had lost, the connection that had been stolen from her by men like Wellington. As they prepared to leave, Murphy was brought from the bathroom, his hands secured behind his back, his earlier bravado entirely gone. He looked older in the harsh morning light, a man confronting the consequences of decades of bad choices. Where are you taking me? Connor checked the restraints, ensuring they were secure, but not cutting off circulation. Somewhere we can talk about Wellington, about the operation, about my brother. Murphy's laugh was hollow. You think knowing the whole truth will bring you peace? Trust me, it won't. Connor met his gaze steadily. I don't want peace, I want justice. Fancy words can lie all day long. Actions never do. They left the safe house as dawn broke over Brooklyn, the October sky painted in shades of pink and gold that seemed mockingly beautiful given the circumstances. Martinez departed first, returning to his precinct to begin laying groundwork for the evidence release. Mike followed with Ruby, driving a nondescript sedan with rental plates that couldn't be traced back to any of them. Connor, Charlotte, and Murphy took Martinez's personal vehicle, an aging Jeep Cherokee with tinted windows and New York plates. Connor drove Charlotte beside him in the passenger seat, Murphy secured in the back. They crossed into New Jersey as the morning rush hour began blending into the stream of commuters heading away from the city. The motel was exactly what Connor had specified, a faded roadside establishment that accepted cash, asked no questions, and featured rooms with clear sight lines to both the parking lot and the surrounding area. The kind of place that catered to truckers, traveling salesmen, and people who needed temporary anonymity. Connor secured Murphy to a chair in the corner of the room, then did a thorough sweep for surveillance devices, checking vents, light fixtures, smoke detectors. Charlotte watched this process with newfound respect, recognizing the methodical precision of a man trained to operate in hostile territory. Is this how you always travel? Checking for bugs, securing exits, maintaining situational awareness. Connor's smile was grim. Only when people are trying to kill me. With Murphy secured and the room cleared, Connor turned his attention to their captive. The bravado that had characterized Murphy at the warehouse was gone, replaced by the weary resignation of a man who knew the game was finally over. Tell me about Wellington, the whole operation. Start at the beginning. Murphy's side shoulders slumping in defeat. It started in the early 2000s. Small-scale money laundering for local construction firms, nothing fancy. Wellington was an assistant DA back then, ambitious, connected. He helped make problems disappear for the right price. Charlotte listened intently, her face a mask of controlled emotion as Murphy described the operation that had destroyed her family. By 2015, they'd expanded. International clients, drug cartels, arms dealers, politicians needing to hide campaign contributions. Wellington was a judge by then perfectly positioned to steer investigations away from the operation. Connor leaned against the wall, arms crossed, absorbing the information with the focused attention of a man assembling intelligence. And my brother, how did he get involved? Murphy's laugh was bitter. James Walsh, corrections officer with a gambling problem and a failing marriage. Wellington's people spotted him as a potential asset early on. Started by offering to cover his debts, then gradually increased their hold on him. By the time they asked him to eliminate Robert Harrison, he was in too deep to refuse. Charlotte's voice was steady despite the emotional weight of the conversation. Why my father? Why did they need him eliminated? Murphy met her gaze directly. Perhaps the first honest interaction they'd had, because he kept records, meticulous ones. We didn't know about them until after his conviction, when a routine cell search turned up notes he'd been making. He was documenting everything from memory rebuilding the ledgers that had been confiscated during his arrest. Connor's mind raced, connecting dots, seeing patterns, and Wellington ordered the hit. Murphy nodded slowly. Wellington gave the order. But he wasn't the top of the pyramid. The revelation hung in the air, heavy with implication. Charlotte leaned forward, intensity radiating from every line of her body. Who then? Who was above Wellington? Murphy's expression was a mixture of fear and resignation. Senator Edward Prescott, chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. He provided political protection, steered legislation to create loopholes for the operation. In return, he received millions in untraceable campaign funds in private accounts. Connor absorbed this information with the calm assessment of a man accustomed to recalibrating mission parameters based on new intelligence. And my brother's suicide, Murphy couldn't meet his eyes. After Harrison's death, your brother started asking questions. Found out who Harrison really was, what he'd been involved in. Realized he'd been manipulated into killing an innocent man. He threatened to go public. The weight of these revelations settled over the room like a physical presence. Connor's expression remained carefully neutral, but Charlotte could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled fury in his eyes. They staged his suicide. It wasn't a question. Murphy nodded anyway. Made it look like gambling debts, depression over his divorce. Clean, professional, no questions asked. Charlotte's hands clenched into fists, her carefully constructed composure cracking at the edges. Just like they did with my mother, Murphy had the decency to look away. Yes, similar methods, similar cover story. Connor pushed himself away from the wall, crossing to the window to check the parking lot, the road beyond. The tactical movement provided a moment to process, to compartmentalize the rage that threatened to overwhelm his judgment. When he turned back, his voice was steady, controlled. Martinez's evidence release is scheduled for noon. That gives us 3 hours to decide what to do with you. Murphy's laugh held no humor. We both know I'm not walking away from this. Charlotte studied him, the architect of so much of her family's suffering, now reduced to a tired old man awaiting judgment. You could testify. Tell a jury what you've told us. Murphy shook his head. Prescott's people would find me in any prison, any witness protection program. I'd be dead within a week. Connor recognized the truth in this assessment. Men like Prescott didn't leave loose ends, didn't allow witnesses to testify against them. Murphy's knowledge made him valuable, but also marked him for elimination the moment he was in custody. Charlotte's phone chimed with a text message. Martinez, evidence uploaded, distribution protocols in place. Noon release confirmed. She showed the message to Connor, a weight lifting from her shoulders. 7 years of work of planning, of building an identity and a company and a life centered around revenge, all culminating in this moment. It's really happening. Connor nodded, his own tension easing slightly. Whatever came next, Wellington and Prescott would face exposure. The evidence would be too widely distributed to contain, too thoroughly documented to dismiss. We need to move. This location won't be secure once the evidence goes public. Murphy watched this exchange with the fatalistic acceptance of a man who had run out of options. What about me? Connor considered the question, weighing justice against practicality, revenge against mercy. You're coming with us. Your testimony could be valuable if Martinez's case goes to trial. Murphy's laugh was hollow. If I live that long. Charlotte stepped closer, studying the man who had been part of destroying her family. You helped kill my father, drove my mother to suicide, left my brother and me orphaned. By rights, I should want you dead. Murphy met her gaze steadily, perhaps the first honest interaction they'd had. Yes, you should. Charlotte's smile held no warmth. But that would be too easy. You're going to live, Mr. Murphy. Live to see Wellington and Prescott exposed. Live to testify about their crimes and yours. Live with the consequences of what you've done. The strongest steel gets forged in the hottest fire. They spent the next hour preparing to move. Connor contacted Mike, confirming that Ruby had arrived safely at the cabin. The knowledge that his daughter was secure allowed him to focus fully on the immediate challenges. Charlotte used a burner phone provided by Martinez to check in with her company, issuing cryptic instructions to her second-in-command about contingency protocols they had established years earlier. Blackstone Security Solutions would survive its founder's sudden absence, continuing operations under temporary leadership. At 11:30, they loaded Murphy into the back of the Jeep and departed the motel, heading west on secondary roads that would be less likely to have traffic cameras or police patrols. Their destination was a hunting cabin owned by one of Mike's former rangers, a man who had left the service after losing an arm in the same IED blast that had taken Mike's leg. Connor drove with the hypervigilance of a man in hostile territory, constantly scanning for threats, varying his speed en route to shake any potential pursuit. Charlotte monitored news feeds on a burner phone, watching for the first indications that the evidence had been released as planned. At 12:07, the first headline appeared on a major news site, breaking federal judge implicated in massive money laundering scheme. Charlotte read the article aloud as Connor navigated a particularly winding stretch of rural highway. Federal Judge Harrison Wellington has been implicated in what authorities are calling one of the largest money laundering operations in U.S. history. Documents released simultaneously to multiple news organizations detail a sprawling criminal enterprise involving judicial corruption, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice spanning more than 2 decades. More headlines followed in rapid succession as the coordinated release took effect. Senate Banking Chair Prescott named in federal corruption probe. Blackstone CEO Rebecca Morrison revealed as Charlotte Harrison, daughter of wrongfully convicted accountant and exclusive inside the money laundering operation that corrupted federal judges and senators. By 12:30, the story had exploded across all major news platforms. Martinez sent a text confirming that federal agencies were already issuing statements, securing warrants, preparing for arrests. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented to be buried or dismissed. In the back seat, Murphy listened to these developments with the resignation of a man watching the inevitable approach of consequences long delayed. What happens now? Connor checked the rearview mirror, ensuring they weren't being followed. Now we disappear for a while. Let the system do its work. Charlotte put down the phone, her expression a complex mixture of vindication and uncertainty. 7 years. Everything I've done, every decision I've made, every relationship I've formed or avoided, all of it was leading to this moment. Connor recognized the tone in her voice, the sudden emptiness that came when a mission was completed, when purpose evaporated, leaving only the question of what came next. And now Charlotte stared out the window at the autumn landscape trees aflame with October colors. I don't know. I've been Charlotte Harrison pretending to be Rebecca Morrison for so long, I'm not sure who I am without the mission. Connor understood this disorientation better than most. He'd experienced it himself after leaving the military after losing Jennifer. The vertigo of purpose, lost of identity, unmoored. You rebuild, one day at a time. The hunting cabin appeared as the sun began to set, a rustic structure nestled in a clearing, surrounded by pine trees. Simple, isolated, defensible. Connor secured Murphy to a chair in the main room, then did a thorough sweep of the perimeter, checking sight lines, potential approach routes, escape paths. Charlotte watched this process with new understanding, seeing beyond the methodical movements to the experiences that had shaped them. Connor Walsh wasn't just a plumber who had served in the military. He was a man who had been forged in combat, who carried those lessons in every fiber of his being. As night fell, they monitored the unfolding story on the cabin's ancient television. Wellington had been taken into custody, his home and offices raided by FBI agents. Senator Prescott was reportedly cooperating with authorities, already negotiating terms for reduced charges in exchange for information about higher-level participants in the money laundering operation. The world was cracking open, secrets spilling into the light, powerful men facing the consequences of decades of corruption. And in a rustic cabin in the woods, Charlotte Harrison watched it unfold with the strange detachment of a woman who had achieved her life's purpose and now stood on the precipice of an unplanned future. Connor joined her on the cabin's small porch, offering a cup of coffee from a dented percolator they'd found in the kitchen. Martinez called. Wellington is talking, naming names, dates, accounts, trying to save himself by sacrificing others. Charlotte accepted the coffee, her hands curling around the mug for warmth in the October chill. And Prescott Connor leaned against the porch railing, his posture relaxed for the first time in days. Already cutting deals, offering evidence against international clients' offshore accounts, political connections. The kind of information that could bring down governments. Charlotte sipped her coffee, the bitter liquid warming her from within. So it's really over. Connor nodded, his gaze on the darkening forest. This part is. What comes next is up to you. Charlotte studied him in the fading light, seeing the soldier, the father, the man who had lost as much to Wellington's conspiracy as she had. What about you? What comes next for Connor Walsh? He considered the question, feeling the weight of choices yet unmade. I get my daughter back. Return to fixing pipes instead of fixing conspiracies. Try to build something normal. Charlotte's smile held a sadness born of understanding. Do you think that's possible? After everything we've seen, everything we've done? Connor's answer was measured, honest. I don't know, but I owe it to Ruby to try. They stood in companionable silence as darkness settled over the forest, stars appearing one by one in the clear October sky. Two people from different worlds drawn together by shared loss, by a conspiracy that had taken their families and altered the courses of their lives. Inside, Murphy slept fitfully in his secured chair, a man haunted by the ghosts of his choices. Tomorrow, Martinez would arrange for his transfer to federal custody, where his testimony would help dismantle what remained of Wellington and Prescott's network. Connor's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. A photo of Ruby smiling beside a small campfire marshmallow on a stick, her face glowing with childhood excitement, despite the circumstances that had brought her to the cabin upstate. The sight eased something in Connor's chest, a knot of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. Whatever came next, Ruby was safe. The men who had threatened her were in custody, or soon would be. The immediate danger had passed. Charlotte caught a glimpse of the photo, something wistful crossing her face. She's remarkable. Strong like her father. Connor pocketed the phone, the image of Ruby's smile stored safely in his memory. She's everything good about her mother, and nothing bad about me. Charlotte turned to face him fully, her expression earnest in the gathering darkness. I think you're wrong about that. She has your courage, your ability to remain calm in chaos, your moral compass. The compliment was unexpected, touching something vulnerable beneath Connor's carefully maintained composure. 6 months later, Connor stood in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, installing a new garbage disposal. The old woman supervised from a nearby stool, offering commentary on his technique with the same blunt authority she'd always wielded. You work better now, more focused. less angry inside. Connor tightened a connection, checking the seal with practiced fingers. I was never angry with you, Mrs. Chen. The old woman snorted, unimpressed by this evasion. Not with me, with world, with self. Now different. More peace. Connor couldn't argue with her assessment. The months since Wellington's arrest had brought changes he couldn't have anticipated. The conspiracy had unraveled with surprising speed, powerful men turning on each other in desperate attempts to save themselves. Martinez's careful case building had ensured that the evidence couldn't be buried or dismissed. Ruby had returned from the cabin upstate with stories of campfires and hiking trails, apparently untraumatized by her brief abduction. Children were resilient more so than adults sometimes. She'd started seeing a counselor anyway at Connor's insistence. Some wounds weren't visible until years later. As for Charlotte Harrison, formerly Rebecca Morrison, she had surprised everyone by cooperating fully with federal investigators, providing additional evidence that strengthened the case against Wellington and Prescott. Blackstone Security Solutions had been restructured, its legitimate operations continuing under new leadership, while Charlotte stepped away entirely. The doorbell rang, interrupting Mrs. Chen's critique of Connor's plumbing technique. The old woman shuffled to answer it, returning moments later with a visitor. Your lady friend here. Charlotte stood in the kitchen doorway, looking different than she had 6 months ago. The polished executive was gone, replaced by a woman in jeans and a simple sweater. Her blonde hair cut shorter, her face free of makeup. She looked younger, somehow unburdened. Hello, Connor. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, surprised but not displeased by her appearance. Charlotte, didn't know you were back in town. She smiled, the expression more genuine than any he'd seen during their initial encounters. Just got back yesterday. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing. Mrs. Chen looked between them with the knowing expression of a woman who had witnessed 8 decades of human interaction. I make tea. You talk. She bustled toward the stove, giving them the illusion of privacy in the small kitchen. Connor leaned against the counter, studying Charlotte with new eyes. How was Seattle after the dust had settled? Charlotte had relocated to the Pacific Northwest, seeking distance from New York in the remnants of her Rebecca Morrison identity. Connor had received occasional texts, brief updates that revealed little about her state of mind. Rainy, quiet, exactly what I needed. She accepted a cup of tea from Mrs. Chen, who then made herself scarce with the transparent excuse of needing to water plants. When they were alone, Charlotte's expression grew more serious. I've been thinking about what you said, that night at the cabin, about rebuilding one day at a time. Connor nodded, remembering the conversation as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. And Charlotte set down her tea, her movements deliberate. I want to learn how to fix things instead of breaking them. The simple statement carried a weight of meaning that transcended the literal interpretation. Connor recognized it for what it was, not just a request for plumbing lessons, but a declaration of intent to rebuild a life that had been defined by destruction for too long. It's not easy. Tools are heavy. Work is dirty. Clients complain about the bill. His tone was light, but his eyes held understanding. Charlotte's smile acknowledged the deeper conversation beneath the surface. I'm not afraid of hard work or getting my hands dirty. Connor considered her for a long moment, seeing beyond the wealthy CEO to the survivor beneath. A woman who had lost everything, built an empire for revenge, and now stood at the threshold of an entirely new life. I could use an apprentice, someone to hand me tools, learn the trade from the ground up. Charlotte's expression brightened with genuine interest. When do I start? Connor gestured to his half-finished installation. No time like the present. Hand me that pipe wrench. The following weekend, Charlotte arrived at Connor's house in a used Honda Civic instead of the BM. She wore jeans and sneakers, her blondie hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Ruby ran to greet her with the enthusiasm reserved for favorite visitors. Miss Charlotte, Daddy said you're learning to fix things too. Charlotte knelt to Ruby's level, her gray eyes bright with genuine warmth. That's right, and I was hoping you could help teach me. Ruby grabbed her hand with complete trust. Come on, Daddy's teaching me how to fix the kitchen faucet. Connor watched from the doorway as Charlotte followed Ruby into the house, both of them chattering about washers and pipe fittings. The woman who had orchestrated an elaborate revenge plot was gone, replaced by someone trying to learn what normal life looked like. It wouldn't be easy. Trust would have to be rebuilt day by day, choice by choice. But sometimes broken things could be fixed, made stronger than they'd been before. Sometimes people got second chances they didn't deserve, but needed anyway. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows as Connor taught Charlotte the basics of plumbing repair. Her hands were quick and precise, learning the feel of tools, the logic of water pressure, and sealed joints. Ruby provided running commentary explaining each step with the authority of someone who'd been Connor's apprentice for months. You have to feel when it's tight enough, Ruby instructed seriously. Too loose and it leaks. Too tight and you break something important. Charlotte smiled, her expression lighter than Connor had ever seen it. That sounds like good advice for more than just plumbing. As evening approached, Charlotte helped Ruby with homework while Connor prepared dinner. The domestic scene felt strange and right at the same time, like pieces of a puzzle he'd never realized were missing. They ate spaghetti and garlic bread while Ruby told Charlotte about her school projects, her friends, her dreams of becoming either a plumber like her daddy or an astronaut depending on the day. Charlotte listened with the focused attention of someone learning how families worked, how love was built through small daily choices rather than grand gestures. After Ruby went to bed, Connor and Charlotte sat on the back porch with coffee watching stars emerge in the clear October sky. 1 year since the night at the grocery store that had changed everything. Thank you, Charlotte's voice was quiet in the darkness, for giving me this chance, for letting me be part of something good after all the damage I've done. Connor leaned back in his chair, studying her profile in the moonlight. Ruby likes you. That's not easy to earn. Charlotte wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, seeking warmth. She's remarkable. Strong like her father. Connor's throat tightened. You said that once before. Charlotte turned to look at him directly. I meant it then. I mean it now. Connor shook his head, still struggling to see himself as others did. I'm a killer. I've taken lives, and part of me enjoyed it. Charlotte's smile was sad and wise. I spent 7 years planning to destroy Judge Wellington's family. I was going to hurt innocent children to satisfy my need for revenge. You showed me a different path. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been broken and chose to heal instead of breaking others. Connor's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen asking if he could check her water heater tomorrow. Normal life, normal problems with logical solutions. He typed back a quick agreement before pocketing the phone. So what happens now? Charlotte smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes completely. Now I learn how to build instead of destroy. How to fix things that are broken, including myself. Connor nodded slowly. That's good work if you can find it. She laughed softly. I have an excellent teacher. 2 of them, actually. Inside the house, Ruby called out from her bedroom. Daddy will miss Charlotte. Be here for pancakes tomorrow. Connor looked at Charlotte, seeing hope and fear warring in her expression. She'd learned that families weren't built on perfect people, but on people willing to choose each other despite their flaws. What do you think? He asked. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. I'd like that very much. Connor called back to Ruby. Yes, Princess. Miss Charlotte will be here for pancakes. Ruby's delighted giggle drifted through the walls, the sound of a child who knew she was safe, loved, and part of something bigger than herself. The night air carried the scent of falling leaves and wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. Connor thought about Jennifer, about the woman who'd loved him despite his darkness, who'd seen the man he could become rather than the killer he'd been. She would have liked, Charlotte would have approved of second chances and broken people finding ways to heal together. Not every story ended with perfect justice or complete redemption, but sometimes broken people found each other and built something new from the pieces of what they'd lost. Sometimes that was enough. Second chances don't erase the past. They just give you somewhere better to stand while you face it.